I found the file on a Tuesday, not in some classified vault or hidden bunker, in my father's study, 3 weeks after his funeral, while I was boxing up his things to donate. Just a manila folder tucked behind his Vietnam War medals in the bottom drawer of his desk. The label said, Senator Caldwell, Personal. My father had been a colonel, retired 15 years. He spent his last decade gardening and playing golf. He had no reason to have files on senators, especially not Senator Marcus Caldwell, chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee. I opened it anyway. Inside were photographs, documents, transcripts of conversations, evidence of a systematic blackmail operation that had been running for 6 years. The military, my military, the institution I'd served for 12 years, had been blackmailing a United States senator, and my father had been running it. The photos were of Caldwell's son, Lieutenant James Caldwell, in Afghanistan, in situations that would ruin his father's political career. Some showed him in compromising positions with local contractors, others showed financial irregularities, kickbacks, favors traded for supplies. But it was the transcripts that made my stomach drop. Conversations between military intelligence officers and Senator Caldwell. Threats, thinly veiled. Vote yes on the defense appropriations bill, or these photos go public. Support the Syria deployment authorization, or your son's corruption becomes headline news. Senator Caldwell had voted yes, every single time. I sat on the floor of my father's study for 3 hours, reading through it all. My hands shook. Not from anger yet, from disbelief. My father was a good man. Everyone said so at his funeral. Decorated officer, devoted husband, proud American. He'd taught me about honor and integrity, about serving something bigger than yourself. And he'd been blackmailing a senator for half a decade. I took the file home. Didn't tell my wife, Rebecca. Didn't tell anyone. I locked it in my own desk and spent 2 days pretending everything was normal, going to work at the VA hospital where I counseled other veterans, coming home, eating dinner, watching TV. But at night, I'd pull out that file and read it again, looking for something I'd missed, some explanation that would make sense of it. There wasn't one. On Thursday, I made a decision. I was going to expose this, all of it. I'd take the file to a journalist, someone at the Washington Post or the New York Times, someone who could verify it and publish it and make sure everyone knew what had been done in the name of national security. I told myself it was about integrity, about doing the right thing, about making sure my father's legacy didn't include this stain. But really, I was angry, betrayed. My father had lied to me. The military I'd believed in had corrupted itself, and Senator Caldwell, who I'd actually voted for twice, had been controlled like a puppet for years. Someone needed to pay for that. I started making calls, reached out to a journalist I knew from college who now worked at the Post, told him I had something big. We set up a meeting for the following Tuesday. Then, Rebecca found the file. I'd gotten careless. Left it on my desk when I went to take a shower. She was looking for tax documents and saw it, read enough to understand what it was. When I came out, she was sitting on the bed, the file open in her lap. "Tell me this isn't what I think it is," she said. Her face wasn't angry. It was scared. I sat down next to her. "It's exactly what you think it is." "Your father did this?" "Apparently." She closed the file, carefully, like it might explode. "What are you going to do?" "I'm taking it to the press, Tuesday." Rebecca looked at me for a long moment. We'd been married 8 years. She knew my tells, knew when I was sure about something, and when I was forcing certainty. "Why?" she asked. "Why? Because it's wrong, Rebecca. Because blackmail is illegal. Because the military doesn't get to control senators by threatening their kids. Because you're angry at your father." That stopped me. "I'm not." "Yes, you are." She put her hand on mine. "And I get it. I really do. But you need to think about what happens after you do this. Who gets hurt? What it costs? The truth matters more than... Does it? She opened the file again, pointed to one of the transcripts. Look at the dates. What bills was Caldwell voting on? I looked. The Syria deployment authorization, the Afghanistan surge funding, the modernization of the Pacific Fleet, emergency appropriations for soldier equipment in combat zones. Military spending, defense bills, bills that funded the wars you fought in, bills that bought body armor and armored vehicles and medevac helicopters, bills that probably saved hundreds of lives. I pulled my hand away. That doesn't make blackmail okay. I'm not saying it does. I'm saying you need to think about all of it, not just your anger. We didn't talk much the rest of that night. I moved to the guest room, told myself she didn't understand, that she was making excuses for corruption. But I couldn't stop thinking about what she'd said. Before I tell you what happened next, if you're hooked on this story, hit that like button and subscribe. There are dozens more voices like mine here. And drop a comment with your country. I'm curious where all of you are listening from. Friday morning, I called in sick to work. Told Rebecca I had a migraine. Soon as she left for her job at the elementary school, I started digging deeper into the file. I made a timeline. Every instance of blackmail. Every bill Senator Caldwell voted on afterward, every piece of legislation that had been pushed through the Armed Services Committee with his support. Rebecca was right about one thing. It was all military funding, defense budgets, troop deployments, equipment authorizations. Nothing unusual, nothing that stood out as wasteful or corrupt, just standard defense policy that any senator on that committee might have supported anyway. Except Caldwell hadn't supported it before the blackmail started. I found his voting record from before Lieutenant Caldwell's deployment, before the photos and the evidence and my father's operation. Senator Marcus Caldwell had been a deficit hawk, a military skeptic. He'd voted against troop increases, against equipment modernization, against everything the Pentagon asked for. He'd been the lone dissenting vote on the Syria authorization. Until he wasn't. Until suddenly he started voting yes on everything. Without explanation, without debate. And my father's files showed exactly when and why that changed. I should have felt vindicated. This proved the blackmail worked, proved it changed policy, proved it corrupted our democracy. Instead, I felt sick, because I remembered Syria, remembered the equipment we'd gotten right before deployment, the new armor plating on our vehicles, the upgraded communications gear, the helicopter support that saved 3 guys in my unit when we got hit by an IED outside Raqqa. That funding had been in the Syria authorization, the one Caldwell voted for after the blackmail started. I spent the rest of Friday reading through congressional records, bill texts, appropriations details, everything that Senator Caldwell had supported in the 6 years since the operation began. Body armor upgrades, mine-resistant vehicles, medevac helicopter funding, field hospital improvements, better communication equipment, drone support for ground troops. All of it had passed the Armed Services Committee. All of it had been signed into law. All of it had been sent to troops in combat zones. Troops like me. The journalist called that evening, confirmed our Tuesday meeting, asked if I had hard evidence. I said yes. He sounded excited. Said this could be huge, said it could bring down some very powerful people. I hung up and stared at the file. Rebecca came home late, teacher conferences. She found me in the study, surrounded by printouts and documents. "Did you eat?" she asked. "Not hungry." She sat down across from me, picked up one of the pages, a cost-benefit analysis from the Pentagon about vehicle armor upgrades, estimated lives saved, 300 to 450 over 5 years. "You're still going to do it," she said. Not a question. "I don't know." "Yes, you do. You called the journalist back, set up the meeting. How did you—" "I know you, Marcus." She'd started using my father's name when she was trying to make a point. We shared it, Marcus David Thompson, Jr. and Sr. "You're not someone who lets things go, especially when you think there's injustice." "There is injustice. They blackmailed a senator." "They did." She set down the paper. "And soldiers didn't get left behind in situations that would have ended them. Equipment arrived that kept them alive. Missions got support they needed. You're saying the ends justify the means? I'm saying it's more complicated than you want it to be. I'm saying that if you expose this, you'll feel righteous for about a day, and then you'll spend the rest of your life wondering about the equipment that doesn't get funded next time, the votes that don't get cast, the soldiers who don't come home. That's not fair. None of this is fair. But you're about to make a choice that affects more people than just you, more than your father's reputation, more than Senator Caldwell's career. You need to be sure. She left me alone with the file. I didn't sleep that night, just kept reading, thinking, trying to find a way through it that didn't make me complicit in corruption or responsible for whatever came next. Saturday morning, I made another decision. Before I went to the press, I needed to talk to someone who understood this world better than I did, someone who'd lived in it. I needed to talk to Senator Caldwell. Getting a meeting wasn't as hard as I thought. I called his district office, said I was a veteran with information about his son, said it was urgent and personal. They put me through to his scheduler. 20 minutes later, I had an appointment for Monday morning, private meeting, his D.C. office. Rebecca didn't try to talk me out of it, just squeezed my hand when I told her. "What are you going to say to him?" she asked. "I don't know. Warn him, maybe? Let him know the file exists. Give him a chance to explain. Or figure out if he deserves what's coming." Sunday was the longest day of my life. Every hour felt like 3. I kept rehearsing what I'd say, how I'd present the evidence, how I'd read his reaction. I imagined him denying it, or defending it, or begging me not to publish. I didn't imagine what actually happened. Now, here's where everything changed. But real quick, if you're invested in how this ends, I'd genuinely appreciate a subscription. More soldier stories drop daily. Comment your country below. Always amazes me how far these reach. Senator Caldwell's office was smaller than I expected. Not the ceremonial spaces you see on TV, just a working office, desk covered in papers, books on policy and history, photos of his family, including Lieutenant James Caldwell, in uniform, smiling. The senator stood when I entered. He was shorter than he looked on television, grayer, more tired. "Mr. Thompson," he shook my hand. Firm grip. "Thank you for coming. Please sit." I sat, put my bag on the floor. The file was inside. "My staff said you have information about my son." "I do." My voice sounded steadier than I felt. "Your son and an operation that involved him, an operation my father ran." Something changed in his expression. Not fear, recognition. "Your father was Colonel Marcus Thompson." "Yes." "I'm sorry for your loss. I sent flowers. Your mother—" "Received them. Thank you." I pulled out the file, set it on his desk. "But I'm not here about condolences. I'm here about this." He looked at the file, didn't touch it. "You've read it," he said. "Every page, multiple times. And you're here to, what? Confront me? Threaten me? Go to the press?" "I'm here to understand, before I decide what to do with it." Caldwell leaned back in his chair, looked at me for a long moment. Then he did something I didn't expect. He laughed. Not a happy laugh, a bitter, exhausted laugh. "Understand," he repeated. "All right. What do you want to know? Did they blackmail you? Force you to vote their way?" "Yes." No hesitation. No denial. "For 6 years?" 6 years, 4 months, 11 days. He said it like he'd been counting. Every major defense bill, every appropriation, every deployment authorization. They had those photos, those documents, and they made it very clear what would happen if I didn't cooperate. And you just went along with it? I had no choice. My son's career would have been over, his reputation destroyed, prison probably, and my own career, everything I'd built, gone. So yes, I went along with it. You could have gone to the FBI, the Justice Department. You could have exposed them. Could I? He opened a drawer, pulled out his own file, thicker than mine. They showed me what would happen if I tried. Evidence that I knew about James's activities, that I'd covered for him, that I'd facilitated some of his deals. All false, but convincing enough to destroy me before any investigation cleared me. And by then, James would already be in prison. He pushed the file toward me. They were thorough, Mr. Thompson. Your father was many things, but sloppy wasn't one of them. I looked at the file, didn't open it. So you just changed your votes? Started supporting every military spending bill, became exactly what they wanted. I voted yes on equipment that saved lives, on funding that supported troops in combat, on authorizations that you would have voted against otherwise. Yes, he met my eyes. Before James deployed, I believed military spending was out of control, that we were wasting money on equipment we didn't need, fighting wars we shouldn't be in. I believed cutting the defense budget was the fiscally responsible, morally correct thing to do. And then they blackmailed you. And then I voted to send better equipment to the soldiers who were already over there, to give them the support they needed to come home, including, I later learned, your unit in Syria. That hit me harder than I expected. Don't, I said. Don't try to make this sound noble. I'm not. I'm telling you what I told myself every time I cast one of those votes. That I was saving my son, yes. That I was protecting my career, yes. But also that I was keeping soldiers alive. That the equipment I was funding would mean fewer flag-draped coffins coming home. That maybe, just maybe, the corruption I was participating in had a purpose beyond protecting my family. He stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the city. Do you know how many soldiers' funerals I've attended, Mr. Thompson? How many families I've stood with while they buried their sons and daughters? Before the blackmail, I'd attend and think about how we needed to bring everyone home, stop spending money on wars we couldn't win, end the deployments that kept producing casualties. That's not wrong.
Maybe not. But after the blackmail started, I attended those same funerals and thought about the ones who didn't have funerals, the ones who came home because they had better armor, because they had air support, because the equipment I voted for gave them a chance their predecessors didn't have. You're rationalizing. Yes, he turned back to me. Every single day for 6 years, rationalizing, justifying, telling myself that betraying my principles was worth it if it meant fewer mothers crying over closed caskets. He sat back down. So, here's what I want you to understand, Mr. Thompson. I'm not innocent. I was blackmailed, yes, but I also chose to go along with it, chose to vote yes instead of fighting back, chose to become exactly what I'd campaigned against, and I'll carry that for the rest of my life. Then you understand why I'm taking this to the press. I do. He folded his hands. Before you do, though, there's something else you should know, something that's not in your father's file. What? The blackmail, the photos, the evidence against James. He paused. James asked them to do it. The room tilted. What? My son, Lieutenant James Caldwell. He went to military intelligence himself, told them about his situation, about the deals he'd made, and he asked them to use it against me. I couldn't speak. Caldwell opened another drawer, pulled out a letter, handwritten, dated 6 years ago. This arrived 2 days before the first blackmail contact, from James. He explained everything, why he'd done what he did, why he was giving them permission to use it, why he thought it was necessary. He handed me the letter. I read it. It was all there. James Caldwell's confession, his explanation, his request. The letter was matter-of-fact, almost cold. James described his own corruption without excuses, explained how he'd traded favors with contractors, how he'd taken kickbacks, how he'd broken half a dozen military regulations. But then the tone changed. I'm telling you this because I need you to understand what's at stake. Not for me. I'll face whatever consequences come, but for the soldiers who are still over here, the ones who don't have the equipment they need, who are getting ambushed with inadequate support, who are watching their friends get hurt because Congress won't fund the programs that could save them. I know you, Dad. I know you believe in fiscal responsibility, in limiting military spending, in bringing us all home. and I respect that, I do. But from where I'm sitting, watching good soldiers fall because they don't have the armor they need, because their vehicles aren't mine-resistant, because the medevac helicopters are grounded for maintenance, your principles are costing lives. So, I'm giving military intelligence everything they need to make you change your vote. I'm asking them to blackmail you, to force you to fund the equipment we need over here. It's the only way I know to save the people I serve with. I'm sorry it has to be this way, but I'm not sorry for doing it. Your son, James. I read it twice, then a third time. He asked you to blackmail his father? I said quietly. He sacrificed himself to save his unit, to save soldiers he'd never meet. He knew it would end his career eventually, knew the evidence would come out someday, but he bought time. 6 years. 6 years of equipment and support and funding that kept soldiers alive. I need to tell you what happened next, but first, if this story's got you, show some love with a like and subscribe. I read every comment, especially love seeing where you're all from around the world. I sat there holding that letter, trying to process what it meant. Did he know that your father was running the operation? No. Caldwell took the letter back. James approached military intelligence through proper channels, made his request. They saw an opportunity and ran with it. Your father was brought in later, after the operation was already designed. Why my father? Because he was good at what he did, because he believed in the mission, because he'd lost soldiers himself to inadequate equipment and wanted to prevent more losses. The people who designed this operation knew exactly who to recruit. Caldwell carefully folded the letter, put it back in the drawer. Your father was a good man, Mr. Thompson. I mean that. He believed he was serving his country, believed the blackmail was justified if it saved lives. He wasn't some corrupt bureaucrat gaming the system. He was a soldier trying to keep other soldiers alive. By committing a federal offense? Yes, by committing multiple federal offenses, by blackmailing a U.S. senator, by manipulating the democratic process, by doing things that would send him to prison if they came out. He looked at me. Things that would send me to prison too, along with James, along with everyone else involved. So you're asking me not to publish. I am. I'm asking you to understand what you'd be publishing and what would happen afterwards.
The truth would come out. People would be held accountable. Yes, James would go to prison, dishonorable discharge, felony conviction, his life effectively over. I'd be removed from office, probably charged with conspiracy. My career, my reputation, everything I've built, gone. The military intelligence officers involved would face courts-martial, and your father's legacy would be destroyed. Everything people remember about him would be tainted by this. Maybe it should be? Maybe. Caldwell leaned forward. But here's what else would happen. The Armed Services Committee would be in chaos, leadership vacuum. The next defense appropriation would get delayed, probably killed. Equipment that's currently being funded would stop. Support that troops are counting on would disappear because every senator would be terrified of being the next person caught up in scandal. You're exaggerating. Am I? The last major military scandal took 18 months to sort out, cost 3 committee chairmen their jobs, delayed $17 billion in equipment funding. Do you know what happens to soldiers when their equipment gets delayed? When their support gets cut because Congress is too busy investigating to pass budgets? He pulled out a folder, opened it. Photos of soldiers, young faces, names I didn't recognize. These are the soldiers who were lost in the 2 years after that scandal. Not killed in combat, lost because their equipment didn't arrive, because their support got delayed, because Congress was more interested in finding blame than funding troops. That's not fair. No, it's not fair. None of this is fair, but it's real. It's what happens when military scandals break. People get outraged, investigations start, and the actual soldiers, the ones depending on Congress to do their jobs, get forgotten until the outrage dies down. I looked at those photos, young faces, someone's son or daughter. How many? I asked. In that 2-year period, 47. 47 soldiers who might have survived if their equipment had arrived on time, if their support hadn't been delayed, if Congress had been working instead of investigating. He closed the folder. So yes, Mr. Thompson, expose this operation, hold us all accountable, get justice for the corruption, but know that soldiers will pay the price for that justice, just like they always do. We sat in silence, the weight of it pressing down on both of us. Finally, I spoke. What happened to James after he sent that letter? He served out his deployment, came home, resigned his commission. He couldn't stay in after what he'd done, but he'd achieved what he wanted. The equipment got funded, the support got authorized, and his unit came home with fewer casualties than any unit in their battalion. Where is he now? Teaching high school, history and civics. He talks to his students about democracy and principles and the importance of integrity. A sad smile. And every day he carries the weight of compromising all of it to save the people he served with. I understood that weight. I was carrying it myself now. I don't know what to do, I admitted. Neither did I. For 6 years, every time I cast one of those votes, I didn't know if I was doing the right thing or just telling myself a story to feel better about being corrupted. He stood, extended his hand. What you do with that file is your choice. I won't fight you either way, but I wanted you to know the whole truth before you decided. I shook his hand, picked up my bag. The file felt heavier than when I'd arrived. One more thing, Caldwell said as I reached the door. Your father, those last months before he passed, he came to see me several times. Not about blackmail, not about votes, just to talk. About what? About whether he'd done the right thing, about whether saving lives justified the methods, about whether soldiers would forgive him if they knew. He paused. I think he struggled with it more than he let on. I think he wanted to tell you, to explain, but he didn't know how. I nodded, couldn't speak. I left his office and walked for hours, through D.C., past monuments and memorials, places that honored sacrifice and service and principles, places that didn't talk about the complicated choices in between. That night, I called the journalist, told him I'd made a mistake, that the information I had wasn't as solid as I thought, that I needed more time to verify it. He was disappointed, but he understood. Said to call him when I was ready. I wasn't sure I'd ever be ready. Rebecca was waiting when I got home. She didn't ask what I'd decided, just held me while I tried to figure out how to live with either choice. 3 days later, I burned the file. Not in some dramatic moment, just fed it into our fireplace, page by page, watching years of evidence turn to ash. Rebecca watched with me. Are you sure? She asked. No, but I'm doing it anyway. The letter from James Caldwell was the last thing to burn. I held it for a long time before putting it in the flames. What changed your mind? Rebecca asked. I kept thinking about those 47 soldiers, the ones who were lost during that other scandal. I kept imagining their families, their friends, people who loved them and lost them because Congress was too busy investigating to do their jobs. And I thought about my unit, the guys I served with, the equipment we had that kept us alive, the support that saved us when things went wrong. I watched the last page curl and blacken. What if that equipment hadn't arrived? What if we'd been left with inferior gear because Senator Caldwell had stuck to his principles? You don't know that would have happened. No, but I don't know it wouldn't have either. I poked at the ashes. I joined the military because I believed in serving something bigger than myself, in sacrifice, in duty, and honor. But I never thought about what it meant when those principles contradicted each other, when doing the honorable thing meant people might get hurt. Rebecca put her hand on my shoulder. Your father struggled with that too. I could see it those last months, the way he'd look at his medals, at his photos from Vietnam, like he was trying to remember why he'd done any of it. He should have told me about the operation, about what he was doing. Maybe he wanted to. Maybe he thought you'd understand, or maybe he thought you'd hate him for it. Either way, he carried it alone. I would have helped him carry it. Would you? She sat down next to me. Or would you have done exactly what you almost did, exposed it, destroyed his legacy, gotten justice and righteousness and satisfaction, and never had to think about the soldiers who might pay for that justice? I didn't answer. Couldn't. The ashes were cool now, just residue in the fireplace. Nothing that proved anything had ever existed. 2 weeks later, Senator Caldwell voted yes on another defense appropriation, equipment for troops in active combat zones, armor upgrades, vehicle improvements, medical support. I watched the vote on C-SPAN, saw his face as he cast it, the weight he carried. I wondered if James Caldwell was watching too, if he felt that same weight. A month after that, I got a letter. No return address, just my name and address in handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside was a single page. Mr. Thompson, thank you. I don't know what you decided to do with that file, but I know my father is still in office, still voting, still serving, which means you made a choice, a hard choice, the kind that doesn't come with easy answers or clear consciences. I made the same choice 6 years ago, gave them permission to blackmail my own father, sacrificed my career and my integrity for soldiers I'd never meet. I don't know if it was the right choice. I don't know if right and wrong even apply to decisions like this. But I know that soldiers are alive because of it. I know that equipment arrived that kept people breathing. I know that families didn't have to bury someone they loved. And I know that I'd make the same choice again, even knowing what it cost. Thank you for understanding that. Thank you for living with the weight instead of handing it off to someone else. James Caldwell. I read that letter 100 times, looking for absolution, for certainty, for some indication that I'd made the right choice. I never found it. Rebecca asked me once, months later, if I regretted burning the file. Every day, I told her, and not at all. She understood. Both were true. I kept James Caldwell's letter, locked it in the same desk where I'd kept my father's file. Sometimes I'd take it out and read it, remind myself why I'd made the choice I did. Other times I'd imagine the alternative. What would have happened if I'd exposed everything? The investigations, the trials, the outrage and justice and accountability. And then I'd imagine the soldiers, the ones who'd get their equipment delayed, who'd go into danger with inadequate support, who would pay the price for my righteousness. I'd imagine their families, getting the news, burying them, never knowing that they'd been sacrificed on the altar of principle. And then I'd put the letter away, lock the drawer, try to sleep. A year after burning the file, I visited my father's grave, stood there in the cold, stared at his name on the stone. I found your file. I know what you did. I know about Senator Caldwell, about James, about all of it. The wind picked up, rain starting to fall. I wanted to hate you for it, wanted to expose you, make sure everyone knew what you'd compromised, what you'd become. But I couldn't, because I understood why you did it, because I'd been one of those soldiers, because somewhere in some combat zone I'd never see, other soldiers were alive because of your corruption, because you chose their lives over your honor.
The rain was coming down harder now. I didn't move. I don't know if you made the right choice, Dad. I don't know if I made the right choice. I just know we both made the same one. We both decided that soldiers' lives mattered more than our principles, that keeping people alive was worth becoming something we'd taught ourselves to hate. I stood up, rain soaking through my jacket. I hope you found peace with it. I hope you slept at night, because I don't. I lie awake wondering if there was another way, if we could have saved those lives without sacrificing our integrity, if honor and duty could have coexisted instead of contradicting. Thunder in the distance, storm getting worse. But we'll never know, because we made our choices, and we live with them. I left him there, drove home through the storm. Rebecca was waiting with hot coffee and dry clothes. "You okay?" she asked. "No, but I will be." She kissed my forehead. "He'd be proud of you. For understanding. For carrying it." Maybe. That night I had a dream. I was back in Syria, back with my unit. We were rolling through a dusty street in vehicles with upgraded armor plating, wearing body armor that could stop the rounds that used to punch through, carrying communications equipment that actually worked. And when the IED went off, when the blast wave hit, that armor held. Those vehicles protected us. That equipment saved us. I woke up thinking about Senator Caldwell's vote, the appropriation that funded that equipment, the blackmail that forced that vote, the corruption that kept me alive. Rebecca stirred next to me. "Bad dream?" "No," I said. "Just a heavy one." She went back to sleep. I lay there in the dark thinking about choices and costs and the space between right and wrong where most of us actually live. The next morning I went to work, counseled veterans, helped them process their trauma and guilt and questions about what they'd done and why. And when they asked me if they'd made the right choices, if their sacrifices had meaning, if they could live with the things they'd done, I told them the truth. "I don't know, but you made the choices you had to make with the information you had. You did what you thought would save lives, keep people safe, serve something bigger than yourself." Even if it was wrong? Even if it was wrong. Because sometimes wrong and right aren't opposite ends of a spectrum. Sometimes they're tangled up together, and we just have to live with both. They'd nod, understanding, carrying their own weight, just like I carried mine, just like my father carried his, just like Senator Caldwell carried his. All of us living in that space between principles and reality, between honor and necessity, between the people we wanted to be and the choices we actually made. Senator Caldwell is still in office, still voting, still carrying the weight of what was done to him and what he chose to become because of it. James Caldwell is still teaching, still talking to students about democracy and principles, still living with the fact that he destroyed his own career to save people he'd never meet. And I'm still here, still counseling veterans, still lying awake some nights wondering if I made the right choice, still carrying my father's secret like he carried it, in silence, in darkness, in the space between honor and duty where truth becomes complicated. Rebecca asked me once if I'd ever tell anyone, if I'd ever share what I knew. "No," I said, "because some truths don't set you free. They just give you something new to carry." "And you're okay with that?" I thought about it, really thought about it. I'm alive. My unit came home. Soldiers I'll never meet survived because equipment arrived that might not have arrived otherwise. And my father's legacy remains intact. People remember him as a good man, a decorated officer, someone who served with honor. But you know different. I know more. Not different, just more. I took her hand. He was a good man who made a terrible choice, and that choice saved lives. Both of those things are true. I can't celebrate one without acknowledging the other, can't condemn one without diminishing the other. That's a heavy thing to carry. Yeah, but it's mine to carry now. 5 years have passed since I found that file. 5 years since I burned it. 5 years of living with the weight. Senator Caldwell is older now, grayer. He announced last month that he won't seek re-election. His career is ending on his terms, with dignity, with respect. The official story is that he wants to spend more time with family. The real story is that he's carried the weight long enough, that he wants to retire before the secrets catch up to him, before someone else finds what I found and makes a different choice than I did. I sent him a letter when I heard the news. Just 2 words. Well done. He sent one back. 3 words. Thank you, Marcus. We understood each other. 2 people living with impossible knowledge. 2 people who'd chosen silence over justice, because justice had a cost we weren't willing to pay. James Caldwell sent me a Christmas card last year. Photo of him with his students. A note inside. Still teaching, still living with it,
still grateful. I put it with his other letter, locked them both away. My daughter was born 3 months ago. Rebecca and I named her Grace, a reminder that we all need it. Grace for our choices, grace for our failures, grace for the space between who we are and who we wish we could be. I look at her sometimes and wonder what I'll tell her when she's older, when she asks about her grandfather, about his service, about what he taught me. I'll tell her he was a good man, a decorated officer, someone who served his country with distinction. And I'll tell her he taught me that service is complicated, that doing the right thing isn't always clear, that sometimes you have to choose between principles that all seem right and hope you land somewhere close to moral. I won't tell her about the file, about the blackmail, about the choice I made to protect a secret that protected lives. Some truths are mine to carry alone. But I'll tell her this: your grandfather believed that soldiers' lives mattered more than anything, more than politics, more than principles, more than his own reputation. And he spent years making sure those soldiers had what they needed to come home. Everything else is details. Details I'll carry for the rest of my life. Details that wake me up some nights, wondering if there was another way. Details that remind me every day that honor and duty aren't always the same thing, that serving your country sometimes means betraying your principles, that keeping people alive sometimes costs you the person you thought you were. My father understood that. Senator Caldwell understood that. James Caldwell understood that. And now I understand it too. I learned that some truths don't set you free. They just give you something new to carry. That justice has a cost, and sometimes that cost is measured in lives rather than principles. That the right choice isn't always the righteous choice. I learned that soldiers depend on people they'll never meet to make impossible decisions. That equipment and funding and support aren't abstract policy debates. They're the difference between coming home and not coming back. That sometimes corruption saves more lives than integrity. And I learned that my father wasn't the perfect hero I'd believed him to be, but he wasn't a villain either. He was just a man trying to serve something bigger than himself, even when that service required him to become something smaller than he wanted to be. I think about that file sometimes, the one I burned, wonder if copies exist somewhere, in some classified archive or intelligence database. Wonder if someday someone else will find it and make the choice I couldn't. Part of me hopes they do, hopes someone braver than me will expose it all, will demand accountability and justice and truth regardless of the cost. But another part of me, the part that remembers Syria, that remembers the equipment that saved us, that remembers coming home when others didn't, hopes the secret stays buried, hopes that soldiers keep getting the support they need, hopes that lives keep being saved by compromises no one will ever know about, hopes that somewhere my father is at peace with what he did, because I'm not at peace with what I did, and I don't think I ever will be. Rebecca says that's okay, that peace isn't the goal, that living with the weight, carrying it with dignity, teaching our daughter to think critically about service and sacrifice, that's what matters. Maybe she's right. I still visit my father's grave sometimes, still tell him about my choices, about Grace, about the life I'm building in the shadow of his secret. And sometimes when the wind is right, I swear I can hear his response. Not words, just understanding. The understanding that comes from knowing someone else carries what you carried, that your burden didn't die with you, that your son learned the hardest lesson you could teach him, that serving your country isn't always noble or clean or proud. Sometimes it's just carrying impossible weight in silence so others don't have to. I work at the VA hospital every day, counsel veterans who struggle with their own impossible choices, who carry their own impossible weight, and when they ask me how to live with it, how to find peace with the things they've done, I tell them the truth my father never got to tell me. You don't find peace, you just find ways to carry it. You find people who'll help hold the weight. You find purpose in making sure others don't have to make the same choices.
And you find grace for yourself, for others, for the impossible complexity of trying to do right in a world that doesn't always make right easy.
My father's generation carried Vietnam. The choices they made, the things they saw, the moral complexity of a war that didn't have clear heroes or villains. My generation carries Iraq and Afghanistan. The endless deployments, the mission creep, the question of what we were really fighting for and whether it mattered. The next generation will carry whatever comes next, whatever impossible choices their service demands, whatever weight they'll have to bear in silence. And maybe that's what service really means. Not glory or honor or pride, but the willingness to carry weight others can't see, to make choices others won't understand, to sacrifice parts of yourself so others can live full lives, never knowing what was given up for them. My father gave up his integrity. Senator Caldwell gave up his principles. James Caldwell gave up his career. I gave up my righteousness, my certainty, my belief that right and wrong were always distinguishable. And somewhere, soldiers are alive because of those sacrifices. Soldiers who will never know why their equipment arrived on time, why their support was there when they needed it, why they came home when others didn't. They'll just know they served. They'll carry their own weight, their own choices, their own impossible knowledge. And the cycle continues. Grace is crying. Rebecca calls from the nursery. Time to feed her, to hold her, to love her in this imperfect world where good people make terrible choices, and terrible choices sometimes save lives. I put away the letters, locked the drawer, head upstairs. My father's secret is safe. Senator Caldwell's career ends with dignity. James Caldwell teaches another generation about principles and democracy. The blackmail operation remains buried, and I carry the knowledge that I chose silence over justice, that I protected corruption because exposing it might cost lives, that I became complicit in the very system I'd wanted to expose. I don't know if I made the right choice, but I know I made the only choice I could live with. And in the end, that's all any of us can do. Make the choices we can live with. Carry the weight they create. Hope that somewhere, somehow, our compromises serve something bigger than ourselves, even if no one ever knows. Even if we never find peace with it. Even if the only certainty we have is that we'll carry it forever. That's service. That's duty. That's honor. Not the clean, simple version they teach you in training, but the complicated, messy, impossible version you learn when principles collide and lives hang in the balance, and the right thing isn't clear. My father knew that, and he carried it alone for years. But I know it now too, and I don't have to carry it alone. Rebecca knows. James Caldwell knows. Senator Caldwell knows. We're all carrying it together, in silence, in the space between who we are and who we wish we could be. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's all it can be. I pick up Grace. She stops crying, opens her eyes, looks at me with perfect trust. She doesn't know yet that the world is complicated, that good people do questionable things, that service sometimes requires sacrifice that looks like corruption, that her grandfather was both a hero and something darker, that her father chose to protect that darkness rather than expose it. She'll learn those things eventually, when she's older, when she faces her own impossible choices. For now, she just needs to be held, to be fed, to be loved. And I can give her that, despite the weight I carry, despite the choices I've made, despite the knowledge that keeps me awake at night. I can give her love. And maybe, if I do it right, I can give her the wisdom to carry her own impossible weight when the time comes. The wisdom my father tried to give me in the end, through that file, through his service, through the choices he made that I finally understand. Some truths don't set you free. They just give you something new to carry. And we carry it because others can't. Because soldiers depend on it. Because lives hang in the balance. We carry it in silence, in darkness,
in the space between honor and duty where most of us actually live. And we pass it on, not as a burden, but as a truth. That service is complicated, that doing right isn't always clear, that sometimes the hardest choice is the one no one will ever thank you for. That's what my father taught me. That's what I'll teach Grace. And that's what I'll carry for the rest of my life. The weight of knowledge, the cost of silence, the price of keeping soldiers alive. It's heavy, but it's mine. And I'll carry it with whatever grace I can muster. For my father, for Senator Caldwell, for James Caldwell, for the soldiers who lived because of corruption, for the families who didn't have to bury someone they loved, and for myself, for the person I became when I chose silence, for better or worse. That's the story. That's my truth. That's the weight I carry. I don't know if you'd have made the same choice. I don't know if you'd have burned that file, protected that secret, chosen lives over justice. I just know that I did, and I have to live with it every day for the rest of my life. And maybe that's punishment enough, or maybe it's grace. I honestly don't know anymore. I just know I'm still here, still carrying it, still trying to serve something bigger than myself, even when that service is just silence, even when the only honor left is keeping a secret that dishonors everything I thought I believed in. That's service. That's duty. That's what my father taught me. And I'll carry it until I can't anymore.